Hey everyone, tonight we're diving into something that will completely shatter your illusions about the past. We're talking about a world where a single infected cut could kill you, where your own home is crawling with disease, and where surviving just one day requires more strength than most of us will ever possess. This is the brutal reality of life as a medieval peasant woman, and trust me, you wouldn't last until sunset. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Before we begin this journey into one of history's darkest chapters, I want you to do something for me. Take a moment to look around your current space. Notice that clean water flowing from your tap, the soft lighting that responds to a simple switch, the comfortable temperature that you probably don't even think about. Feel that clean fabric against your skin. Breathe in air that isn't thick with smoke and decay. Because in the next hour we're going to strip all of that away, and you're going to understand exactly how privileged your existence really is. If this kind of deep historical dive resonates with you, and you genuinely appreciate content that doesn't sugarcoat the past, then please consider subscribing. But only if you truly value this approach to history. I'd rather have a smaller audience that's genuinely engaged than inflate numbers with people who aren't really interested. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. It's always fascinating to see this global community we've built, people from different continents united by a shared curiosity about the human experience across time. Now, I want you to prepare yourself mentally for what's coming. Dim your lights if you can, maybe put on some headphones to really immerse yourself in this experience. What we're about to explore isn't just educational, it's transformative. Because once you truly understand what life was like for someone like Meredith of Grimhaven, a peasant woman in the year 1347, you'll never take your modern existence for granted again. Forget everything you think you know about medieval times. Forget the romantic images painted by Hollywood and fantasy novels. Forget the noble knights, the grand feasts, and the quaint village life that popular culture has sold you. The reality is so much harsher, so much more desperate, and so utterly brutal that it would break most of us within hours. We're not talking about the life of a queen or even a merchant's daughter. We're diving into the existence of someone who represents 90% of the medieval population, a peasant woman bound to the land owned by a lord she's never spoken to, living in conditions that would make a modern prison cell seem luxurious. This is the story of survival against impossible odds, where every single day is a battle against hunger, disease, violence, and despair. Meredith's world is one where privacy doesn't exist, where your body is never truly your own, where the very air you breathe is trying to kill you. It's a place where childbirth is a death sentence for 1 in 3 women, where a simple headache could mean you're dying, and where the church controls not just your actions but your very thoughts. This is a reality where winter doesn't just mean cold weather, it means months of slow starvation, where your children's cries for food echo through walls so thin you can hear your neighbour's every misery. In Meredith's village of Grimhaven, nestled in the shadow of Lord Aldrich's imposing castle, life isn't measured in years but in seasons survived. The average peasant woman, if she's incredibly lucky and manages to avoid death in childbirth, might live to see 40. But those aren't 40 years of living, they're 40 years of enduring. Every sunrise brings new threats, raids from neighbouring lords, crop failures that mean famine, plagues that can wipe out entire families, and the constant grinding poverty that wears down both body and soul. The village itself sits in a valley that floods every spring, where the soil is poor and the harvests are always uncertain. The peasants' huts cluster around a muddy central area that serves as everything from marketplace to execution ground. There's no paved roads, no proper drainage, no protection from the elements except what they can cobble together from wood, mud, and hope. The smell that permanently hangs over Grimhaven is a mixture of human waste, rotting straw, wood smoke, and death. Because death is always present, always lurking, always ready to claim the weak, the unlucky, or the simply unfortunate. This isn't a world where hard work pays off or where virtue is rewarded. This is a world where being born female means you're automatically considered property, where your value is measured entirely by your ability to bear children and work until you collapse. It's a reality where your lord can take your food, your animals, even your daughters, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it except pray that you'll somehow survive another day. But here's what makes Meredith's story particularly heartbreaking. She doesn't know how abnormal her suffering is. She doesn't know that humans are capable of creating societies where clean water is abundant, where food is safe, where medicine can cure diseases that routinely kill her neighbours. She accepts the brutality of her existence because it's all she's ever known, all anyone in her world has ever known. Tonight, we're going to walk in Meredith's shoes, or more accurately her bare feet, because shoes are a luxury she can't afford. We're going to experience every aspect of her daily struggle, from the moment she wakes up on her bed of mouldy straw to the moment she collapses back onto it, exhausted and probably hungry, praying she'll live to see another dawn. So settle in, because we're about to embark on a journey that will challenge everything you thought you knew about survival, about hardship, and about the incredible fragility of human civilization. This is the story of medieval peasant life, and I guarantee you'll never look at your own life the same way again. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Before we step into Meredith's world of unimaginable hardship, I need to take a moment to connect with all of you watching this. What we're about to explore together isn't just another history lesson. It's a shared journey that will fundamentally change how you see your own life. And I want to make sure we're all prepared for what's coming. First, if you find value in this kind of unflinching historical exploration, if you appreciate content that refuses to romanticize the past or sugarcoat human suffering, then I genuinely hope you'll consider subscribing. But here's the thing, I only want you to subscribe if this type of deep, immersive storytelling truly resonates with you. I'm not interested in inflating subscriber numbers with people who aren't genuinely engaged with this approach to history. I'd rather build a smaller, more connected community of people who are as fascinated by these untold stories as I am. What really excites me about creating this content is seeing how it brings together people from completely different backgrounds, different countries, different time zones, all united by this curiosity about the human experience across history. So please take a moment to let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. Are you settling in for the evening in London? Starting your morning with coffee in Toronto? Taking a lunch break in Tokyo? These connections across space and time feel especially meaningful when we're about to explore a period when most people never travelled more than 5 miles from where they were born. I also want you to know that I read every single comment. The discussions that happen in the comment sections of these videos are often as enlightening as the videos themselves. People share stories about their own ancestors, historians offer additional context, and sometimes viewers from different cultures provide perspectives that add incredible depth to these historical explorations. This community we've built isn't just about passive consumption, it's about active engagement with the past and how it shapes our understanding of the present. Now, I need you to prepare your environment for what's coming, because the sensory experience is crucial to really understanding Meredith's world. If you can, dim your lights, not completely dark, but enough that you're relying more on your other senses. If you have headphones available, put them on. We're going to be talking about sounds, smells, and physical sensations that I want you to almost feel alongside Meredith. Here's something I want you to try. Close your eyes for just 10 seconds and imagine that every modern comfort around you has vanished. No electricity humming in the background, no climate control keeping you comfortable, no clean water accessible with the turn of a handle, no soft fabrics against your skin, no knowledge that if you get seriously injured or ill, help is available. Just silence, cold, uncertainty, and the constant awareness as you try to shift position. Every joint in your 26-year-old body screams in protest. In modern terms, you're barely into young adulthood, but in medieval peasant years, you're already approaching middle age. Your spine aches from years of bending over crops, carrying heavy loads and sleeping on surfaces that would make prison inmates revolt. Your hands are so cracked and scarred from rough work that they look like they belong to someone twice your age. Your feet, which haven't known the luxury of proper shoes since childhood, are covered in calluses, cuts, and what you hope aren't the early signs of infection. The sound that finally forces you fully awake isn't a gentle alarm clock. It's your youngest child, 2-year-old Aldwin, crying from hunger. Again. He's been crying on and off through the night because, like the rest of your family, he went to bed hungry last night. and the night before, and most nights for the past month, because the grain stores are running low and spring is still weeks away. His cries mix with the sounds of your neighbour's misery seeping through the thin walls, someone's racking cough that suggests they won't see summer, a woman weeping quietly over some fresh loss, and the constant scratching and scurrying of the vermin that share everyone's living spaces. Your husband Gareth stirs beside you, and you can feel the heat radiating from his body, not the pleasant warmth of a loved one, but the concerning heat of someone fighting off another bout of fever. He's been sick on and off for weeks, but there's no such thing as taking time off to recover when you're a peasant. Sick or not, he'll be expected in Lord Aldrich's fields before sunrise, and if he fails to appear, your family's already meagre food rations could be cut even further. Your other children, 8-year-old Mara and 5-year-old Jorin, are still huddled together under the single blanket your family possesses. It's made of rough wool that hasn't been washed in living memory, and weighs almost as much as a child from accumulated dirt and moisture. The blanket provides some warmth, but it also serves as a breeding ground for lice, fleas, and other parasites that treat your family's bodies as an all-you-can-eat buffet. As consciousness fully returns, you become aware of the symphony of discomfort that is your daily reality. Your stomach gnaws at itself with hunger. Your skin itches in at least a dozen places where various insects have left their mark. Your throat is raw from breathing the thick, contaminated air all night. Your back throbs from sleeping on an uneven surface with no support. And underlying everything is a bone-deep exhaustion that never fully goes away, no matter how much you sleep, because your body is constantly fighting malnutrition, disease, and the accumulated damage of a life spent in survival mode. But perhaps the most crushing realization as you wake up is the knowledge of what this day will bring. 14 hours of back-breaking labour in Lord Aldrich's fields, with maybe a handful of grain and some watery soup to sustain you. Constant supervision by his overseers, who have permission to beat you if your work isn't satisfactory. The ever-present fear that today might be the day raiders attack the village, or plague breaks out, or your lord decides to exercise some new cruelty just because he can. You try to stretch, but immediately regret it as the movement sends shooting pains through your malnourished frame. In the corner of the room, you can see the small wooden cross that serves as your family's only decoration, and your only source of hope. The promise that if you endure enough suffering in this life, you might find peace in the next. It's a thin comfort, but it's all you have. This is morning in medieval Grimhaven, where each new day isn't a fresh start but another round in an endless fight for survival. And you haven't even gotten out of bed yet. The straw beneath you has become unbearable, a soggy, fetid mass that seems to be actively trying to make you sicker with every moment you remain on it. You force yourself to sit up, and immediately the true horror of your living conditions reveals itself in the pale pre-dawn light, filtering through the gaps in your walls. Your single room is a monument to human misery compressed into impossible smallness. The space measures roughly 12 feet by 8 feet, smaller than most modern closets, yet it must accommodate your entire family, your few possessions, and whatever livestock Lord Aldrich decides to quarter here during harsh weather. The ceiling is so low that Gareth has to duck when he stands, and the wooden beams overhead are black with decades of smoke from your cooking fire, creating a perpetual twilight even during the day. The walls themselves are a patchwork of desperation. What started as wooden planks has been supplemented over the years with whatever materials you could find or afford, chunks of stone that don't quite fit together, leaving gaps where wind and rain pour through. Mud mixed with straw and human hair to try to seal the worst holes, and pieces of cloth so rotted they disintegrate at the touch. The entire structure leans precariously to one side, supported only by the equally unstable hovel next door. You've grown accustomed to the way the walls sway slightly in strong winds, though you never quite stop wondering if today will be the day the whole thing finally collapses. The floor is nothing more than packed earth mixed with whatever organic matter has fallen, been spilled, or deliberately thrown there over the months. Layers of straw, food scraps, animal droppings and human waste have been trampled into a surface that's perpetually damp and gives off a sweet, sickening smell of decay. You can see mushrooms growing in the corners where moisture collects, and you've long since given up trying to identify all the different types of insects that call your floor home. Your family's possessions are arranged around the edges of the room with the care of someone who knows that losing even one item could mean the difference between life and death. There's a single wooden bowl that serves the entire family, cracked and stained black from years of use. A wooden spoon worn smooth by countless meals of thin gruel. 2 clay pots, one for cooking, one for storing the small amount of grain you're allowed to keep. A rusty knife that's more valuable than any jewellery and is guarded accordingly. Your husband's farming tools lean against the wall. A wooden-handled hoe with an iron blade chipped and worn thin. A sickle that's been sharpened so many times the metal is barely a sliver, and a wooden rake with half its teeth missing. The cooking area is a circle of stones in the centre of the room where you build your fire each day. There's no chimney, just a hole in the roof that lets out some of the smoke while letting in rain, snow and birds. The stones are permanently blackened, and the area around them is littered with ash, charcoal and the bones of whatever small animals you've managed to catch or been allowed to eat. The smoke that constantly fills the room has stained everything a grimy black and irritates your eyes and lungs until breathing becomes a conscious effort. In one corner sits your family's most precious possession, a small wooden chest that contains your few changes of clothing, the handful of copper coins you've managed to save over the years, and the marriage contract that proves your union to Gareth. The chest is locked, though the lock is more symbolic than secure. Anyone determined to break in could do so easily. But in a village where everyone is equally poor, theft is rare simply because no one has anything worth stealing. The corner where your children sleep has been the site of unimaginable tragedy. Of the 7 children you've given birth to, only 3 survive. The others died in this very room, 2 in infancy from diseases you couldn't treat, 1 from starvation during the terrible winter 3 years ago, and 1 from an accident while working in the fields. You've learned not to become too attached to your children until they reach at least 5 years of age, because the chances of them surviving that long are depressingly small. Your husband's corner contains his few personal items, a wooden cup carved by his father, now dead 10 years, a small piece of metal that serves as both razor and general cutting tool, and a collection of rags that serve various purposes from bandages to cleaning cloths to emergency toilet paper. Next to these sits a clay pot that serves as the family's chamber pot, emptied daily into the communal waste pit behind the village, though the smell never quite leaves the room. The walls are decorated, if you can call it that, with a few items that represent the sum total of beauty in your life. A wooden cross that Gareth carved early in your marriage, so crude it's barely recognisable but precious beyond measure. A few dried flowers that Mara picked last summer, now brown and crumbling but still hanging by threads, and scratched into the wall near your bed, the names of your dead children, carved there by Gareth during his grief. Every surface in the room tells a story of survival pushed to its absolute limits. Water stains mark the places where the roof leaks worst. Scratches in the wood show where rats have gnawed through your possessions. Dark stains that you try not to think about mark spots where family members have been sick, injured, or worse. The room isn't just your home, it's a museum of human endurance and the physical manifestation of a life lived on the very edge of existence. As you finally force yourself to stand, your bare feet touch the cold, damp earth floor, and you're reminded once again that this isn't just poverty. This is a form of existence so harsh that every single day represents a victory against overwhelming odds. Your bladder is screaming at you with an urgency that can't be ignored any longer. In your world, the simple human need to relieve yourself becomes a daily humiliation that strips away every shred of dignity you might hope to maintain. There's no bathroom, no privacy, no toilet, and certainly no toilet paper. What you have instead is a system so degrading that it would make grown adults in the modern world weep with horror. Your family's bathroom facilities consist of a wooden bucket that sits in the corner of your single room, barely 3 feet from where your children sleep. The bucket is already half full from last night's use by your family of 5, and the smell rising from it mingles with all the other odours in your confined space to create an atmosphere so thick with human waste that breathing through your mouth becomes a survival strategy. The bucket hasn't been properly cleaned in weeks. Cleaning it would require water you can't spare and soap that doesn't exist in your world. But even this degrading indoor option is a luxury compared to what awaits you outside. Because your family's bucket is nearly full, and the unspoken rule in your household is that whoever fills it gets to empty it. You're forced to venture outside to the communal latrine that serves your section of Grimhaven. The walk to this facility, if you can dignify it with that name, takes you through the village's main pathway, which doubles as an open sewer. The path beneath your bare feet is a treacherous mixture of mud, animal droppings, rotting food scraps, and human waste that's been thrown from windows and doorways. The village has no sewage system, no drainage, and no organised waste removal. Every household simply tosses their refuse into the street, creating a flowing river of filth that gets deeper and more toxic with each passing day. As you navigate this obstacle course of human misery, you must watch every step to avoid the larger chunks of waste, the deeper puddles of contaminated water, and the occasional dead animal that's been left to rot where it fell. The communal latrine is a wooden structure that barely deserves the name building. It's essentially a long wooden bench with holes cut out of it, positioned over a pit that hasn't been properly maintained in living memory. The structure accommodates 8 people at once, sitting shoulder to shoulder with no barriers, no privacy, and no escape from the intimate sounds and smells of your neighbour's bodily functions. Privacy is not just absent, it's a foreign concept that doesn't exist in your vocabulary. As you approach the latrine, you can already hear the morning crowd. Goodwife Helga, from 3 houses down, groaning and complaining about her digestive troubles loud enough for the entire village to hear. Old Henrik, whose bowel problems have become a source of community discussion, and several children whose parents have sent them to relieve themselves before the morning's work begins. The conversation flows freely, discussions about whose crops are failing, which neighbour might be stealing food, and graphic descriptions of various illnesses and ailments. There's no embarrassment about bodily functions, because embarrassment is a luxury your world can't afford. The smell that greets you as you enter the latrine is beyond description. Imagine the worst public restroom you've ever encountered. Multiply that by 100, add the scent of rotting meat and standing water, then trap it all in an enclosed space with no ventilation. The pit beneath the bench hasn't been emptied in months, and the waste has accumulated to the point where it's nearly reaching the wooden seats. Flies swarm in thick clouds, and you can see maggots writhing in the mass below. The wooden bench itself is stained and slippery with substances you try not to identify. There's no toilet paper because paper is a luxury beyond your comprehension. Instead, you use whatever's available, leaves when you can find them, though you must be careful because some are poisonous, strips of cloth torn from old clothing, though fabric is too valuable to waste on such purposes, or smooth stones, which leave you raw and bleeding. Most often, you use nothing at all, cleaning yourself as best you can with your hands and hoping to find water later to rinse them off. The social dynamics of the latrine create their own form of torment. You must sit next to whoever arrives at the same time, regardless of their health status, personal hygiene, or social standing. Old Martha, who has some kind of skin disease that causes her to scratch constantly and leave flakes of dead skin everywhere she sits, might be on your left. Young Thomas, whose family's diet of rotten turnips gives him explosive digestive problems, might be on your right. There's no choice, no escape, and no way to avoid the intimate details of their bodily functions. The latrine is also where village politics are conducted, gossip is shared, and social hierarchies are reinforced. While you're in this most vulnerable position, village elders might choose to lecture you about your family's inadequate grain contributions. Neighbours might accuse you of stealing water from the communal well, or the village reeve might announce new taxes or labour requirements. You're expected to listen respectfully and respond appropriately, even while in the most undignified position imaginable. When you finally finish and prepare to leave, the humiliation isn't over. You must somehow clean yourself without soap, without clean water, and without anything resembling sanitary supplies. Most people simply wipe their hands on their clothing, which is already so filthy that a little more contamination hardly matters. Others walk to the village well to rinse their hands, but the well water is often contaminated with runoff from the very waste you've just encountered. The walk back to your hovel takes you through the same river of filth, but now you're carrying the bucket that needs to be emptied into the communal waste pit behind the village. This pit is a festering crater where all the village's human and animal waste is dumped, creating a toxic soup that breeds disease and attracts every form of vermin imaginable. Emptying your family's bucket means getting close enough to this pit to pour its contents in, breathing the concentrated fumes, and almost certainly splashing some of the contaminated material onto your clothing and skin. And this entire degrading process will be repeated multiple times throughout the day, because there's no holding it when nature calls, and there's certainly no planning your bathroom breaks around your dignity. After the morning's humiliation at the latrine, your stomach begins its daily protest, a gnawing, cramping pain that reminds you that you haven't had a proper meal in days. It's time for what passes as breakfast in your world, though calling it a meal would be laughably optimistic. What awaits you is a grim ritual of consuming whatever meagre scraps might keep you alive for another day, assuming the food doesn't kill you first. Your breakfast consists of pottage, a watery gruel that's been simmering in the same pot for over a week. Each day, you add whatever you can find to the mixture. Grain when you have it, which is rarely. Root vegetables that are more rot than substance. Scraps of meat so old and questionable that you've learned not to examine them too closely. And water from the village well that carries its own collection of diseases and parasites. The pot never fully empties and never gets properly cleaned. You simply add new ingredients to whatever remains from previous days, creating a constantly evolving experiment in survival cuisine. The smell rising from your cooking pot would make a modern person vomit instantly. It's a complex bouquet of decay, fermentation, and something you've learned to identify as the scent of meat going bad in the heat. But smell is a luxury you can't afford to consider when you're slowly starving. You've trained yourself to breathe through your mouth while eating, though that brings its own problems as you can taste the foul mixture more intensely. Your single wooden bowl is passed around the family in order of importance. Gareth eats first because he needs strength for the fields, then you, then the children in order of the age. By the time little Aldwin gets his portion, the pottage has cooled into a congealed mass with a skin on top that must be broken through to reach the liquid beneath. Each person uses the same spoon, though washing it between uses would waste precious water and time you don't have. The grain in your pottage, when you're fortunate enough to have any, is barley or rye, never wheat, which is reserved for Lord Aldrich's table. Even this inferior grain is often mouldy, having been stored in damp conditions that promote the growth of ergot, a fungus that causes convulsions, hallucinations, and often death. You've learned to recognize the black growths on the grain kernels, but hunger makes you less selective than you should be. Sometimes the choice isn't between good food and bad food, it's between poisonous food and no food at all. Your bread, which you're allowed perhaps twice a week if you're lucky, is a dense, dark mass that bears no resemblance to anything a modern person would recognize as bread. It's made from a mixture of whatever grains can be found, often supplemented with sawdust, ground acorns, or even clay to make the small amount of flour stretch further. The loaf is hard enough to use as a weapon, and often contains foreign objects, pieces of stone from the grinding mill, mouse droppings, bits of wood, and unidentifiable chunks that you've learned not to examine too closely. Eating this bread requires strategy. You can't simply bite into it. Your teeth, already worn down by years of hard living and poor nutrition, would break against its surface. Instead, you must soak pieces in whatever liquid is available, well water when you can spare it, small beer when it's available, or more often the broth from your pottage. Even then, the bread retains a gritty texture from the stone particles and a bitter taste from the various adulterants mixed into the flour. Your beverage choices are equally grim. Water from the village well is cloudy, and often has a distinct taste of decay, contaminated by runoff from the waste pit and whatever dead animals might have fallen into it upstream. You've learned to let the water sit so the worst of the sediment settles to the bottom, but even then, drinking it is always a gamble. Small beer is safer but rarely available. Brewing requires grain that you need for food, and the process takes time and resources you don't have. When you can obtain it, usually during religious festivals or when Lord Aldrich is feeling generous, you might get a piece of cheese or a strip of dried meat, but these luxuries come with their own risks. The cheese is often rancid, green with mould, and has a texture like soap. The meat, preserved with salt when available or simply dried in the open air, is tough as leather and frequently crawling with maggots. You learn to cut away the worst parts and eat what remains, because protein is protein, and you can't afford to be particular. The most heartbreaking part of breakfast is watching your children eat. Little Aldwin's ribs are clearly visible through his thin skin, and his belly is distended not from fullness, but from malnutrition. Mara tries to save part of her portion for later, not understanding that there is no later, that whatever food is available now must be consumed immediately, or it will spoil or be taken by rats. Jorin has developed the disturbing habit of eating too quickly, gorging himself because he's learned that food might disappear without warning. The cooking process itself is fraught with danger. Your fire is made from whatever fuel you can gather. Wood when available, dried animal dung most of the time, or straw when you're desperate. The smoke fills your small room because there's no proper chimney. just a hole in the roof that also lets in rain. You must constantly tend the fire to keep it from dying, while simultaneously trying not to burn yourself, your clothing, or your home. Burns are common, and with no medical treatment available, even small burns often become infected and life-threatening. The timing of meals is dictated not by hunger, but by the availability of food and the demands of work. You might eat this meagre breakfast at dawn, then not eat again until sunset, surviving the day on whatever energy you can extract from the morning's gruel. Your body has adapted to this feast or famine existence, but the adaptation comes at a terrible cost: constant weakness, frequent illness, and the gradual wearing down of your physical capabilities. As you finish your portion of pottage and prepare to face the day's labour, you're acutely aware that this meal, such as it is, might be the last food you see for many hours. The hunger will return within an hour, gnawing at your insides and making concentration difficult. But there's nothing to be done about it except endure and hope that somehow, today, you might find or earn enough to fill your belly just once. With your stomach somewhat less empty but far from satisfied, you must now face the daily ordeal of getting dressed. Though dressed isn't a generous term for the process of wrapping yourself in the few scraps of fabric that pass for clothing in your world. What you're about to put on isn't just inadequate protection from the elements, it's a collection of rags so filthy, worn, and infested that wearing them is almost as much of a health hazard as going naked. Your entire wardrobe consists of exactly 2 garments: the chemise you're currently wearing, which hasn't been removed from your body in over 3 weeks, and a woolen overdress that serves as your outer layer for all occasions, seasons, and activities. The chemise, made from rough linen that was coarse and scratchy even when new, has become a second skin that's permanently stained with sweat, blood, food, and substances you try not to identify. The fabric has worn so thin in places that it's more holes than cloth, and what remains has taken on a greyish-brown colour that no amount of washing could ever restore to its original off-white. The process of changing clothes is nearly impossible, because you own nothing else to wear while washing what you have. Instead, you simply layer the overdress on top of the chemise you've been wearing, creating a sandwich of filth that traps body heat, moisture, and odours in a way that makes your skin crawl constantly. The wool overdress is dyed a deep brown, not by choice, but because brown dye is the cheapest available, made from tree bark and iron-rich mud that stains everything it touches, including your skin. This overdress is your entire outfit for every activity: working in the fields, cooking over an open fire, sleeping, attending church, and even giving birth. It's been patched so many times with scraps of different fabrics that it looks like a crazy quilt made by someone with no understanding of colour coordination. Some patches are made from pieces of your dead children's clothing, others from fabric torn from your husband's garments when they became unwearable, and still others from cloth you've begged from neighbours in exchange for labour or favours. The dress has no fitted waist, no shape, and no consideration for comfort or movement. It's essentially a long, shapeless sack with holes cut for your arms and head. The sleeves are too short, leaving your forearms exposed to the elements, and the hem barely reaches your ankles, providing no protection for your feet and lower legs. There are no fastenings, no buttons, no way to adjust the fit. You simply pull it over your head and hope it stays in place during the day's activities. Underneath this outer layer, you have no undergarments, as modern people would understand them. The concept of brasiers, underwear, or stockings doesn't exist in your world, both because such items haven't been invented, and because even if they had, you couldn't afford them. Your bare skin rubs directly against the rough wool, creating constant irritation, chafing, and open sores that never fully heal because they're re-injured every day by the same rough fabric. Your feet are completely bare, as they have been for most of your adult life. Shoes are a luxury so far beyond your means that you've stopped thinking about them as something humans wear. Your feet have developed thick calluses that serve as natural shoes, but these calluses are constantly cracking, bleeding, and becoming infected. Walking on the rough ground, through puddles of contaminated water, and over sharp stones has left your feet covered in scars, cuts, and permanent deformities. In winter, your feet turn blue with cold and lose feeling for hours at a time. The most horrifying aspect of your clothing situation is the ecosystem of parasites that live in the fabric. Your clothes are home to lice, fleas, bedbugs, and other insects that treat your body as an all-you-can-eat buffet. The lice are so numerous that you can see them moving through the seams of your dress, and their bites cover your skin in red welts that itch constantly. You've developed a nervous habit of scratching, which has left your arms and neck covered in open wounds that attract more insects and often become infected. Fleas jump from your clothing to your skin and back again, leaving trails of bites that become swollen and painful. At night, you can feel them moving across your body, but there's nothing you can do to stop them. The bedbugs that live in the seams of your clothes come out to feed on your blood while you sleep, leaving you covered in distinctive red bumps that burn and itch for days. The smell of your clothing is indescribable. It's a combination of old sweat, rancid body oils, food stains, smoke from your cooking fire, and the musty odour of fabric that's never properly dried. The wool has absorbed every scent from your daily life. The stench of the latrine, the smell of rotting food, the metallic odour of blood from various cuts and injuries, and the sour smell of fierce sweat that comes from living in constant anxiety about survival. Washing your clothes is virtually impossible. You would need large amounts of water, which you can't spare from drinking and cooking. You would need soap, which doesn't exist in any form you could afford. You would need a clean place to dry the clothes, which doesn't exist in your environment. And most critically, you would need something else to wear while your clothes dried, which you don't have. So instead, you occasionally try to scrape off the worst of the accumulated filth with a stick or stone. But this only spreads the dirt around rather than removing it. In winter, your inadequate clothing becomes a death trap. The wool provides some insulation when dry, but it becomes heavy and cold when wet, which it often is due to the constant dampness of your environment. You have no coat, no cloak, no way to protect yourself from wind, rain or snow, except to huddle closer to your family and hope that shared body heat will keep you alive through the night. The psychological impact of being constantly dirty and uncomfortable in your own skin is perhaps worse than the physical discomfort. You've forgotten what it feels like to be clean, to wear fresh clothing, to feel fabric that doesn't scratch and bite at your skin. The constant irritation makes you short-tempered and affects your ability to concentrate on tasks that require precision or attention to detail. As you adjust your dress and prepare to face the day's labour, you're aware that these same clothes will be what you wear tomorrow and the day after and for months to come until they literally fall apart from wear and rot. The church bells of Grimhaven begin their harsh clanging, signalling that your day of back-breaking labour is about to begin. But this isn't just any work. This is the kind of physical torment that will systematically destroy your body while keeping you just barely alive enough to continue serving your Lord's interests. Welcome to the reality of peasant labour, where every day is a test of how much human suffering one body can endure before it simply gives out. Your work begins before the sun has fully risen, and it won't end until long after it sets. There are no weekends in your world, no vacation days, no sick leave, and certainly no concept of work-life balance. There is only work, and the brief periods of exhausted collapse between work sessions that you generously call rest. Your body belongs to Lord Aldrich just as surely as if you were a piece of farm equipment, and like farm equipment, you're expected to function regardless of your condition, until you break down completely. Today, like most days, you'll be working in the Lord's fields, but the specific torture depends on the season. Since it's early spring, your task is preparing the soil for planting, which means you'll spend the next 14 hours bent over at an impossible angle, using a crude wooden hoe to break up earth that's been hardened by winter frost. The hoe is a simple tool, a wooden handle attached to a small iron blade that's been sharpened and resharpened so many times it's barely more than a sliver of metal. The handle is worn smooth by countless hands, but it's also cracked and splintered, guaranteeing that by the end of the day your palms will be full of wooden fragments and your hands will be bleeding. The work itself is mind-numbing in its repetition and brutality. You bend over, strike the earth, break up the clods, move forward 6 inches and repeat. Again and again and again for hours that stretch into an eternity of pain. Your back begins aching within the first hour, a deep, burning pain that radiates from your spine down into your legs. But there's no stopping, no straightening up to stretch, no brief respite from the agony. The Lord's overseer, a cruel man named Willem who takes pleasure in others' suffering, watches constantly for any sign of slacking and carries a leather whip that he uses liberally on anyone who doesn't maintain the required pace. The physical demands of the work are beyond what any modern person could imagine enduring. You're expected to hoe approximately 1 acre per day, a task that requires you to make thousands of individual strikes with the hoe, each one jarring your already damaged spine and sending shockwaves through your malnourished frame. Your hands, which have never known the luxury of gloves, quickly develop blisters that burst and bleed, making every grip of the hoe handle agony. But you can't stop. Stopping means punishment, and punishment means less food for your family. As the morning progresses, the sun rises higher, and with it comes heat that turns your work into a furnace of suffering. You're wearing your heavy wool dress because it's all you own, and it quickly becomes soaked with sweat that can't evaporate through the thick fabric. The dress clings to your body, chafing against skin that's already raw from insect bites and poor hygiene. The wool retains heat like an oven, and you begin to feel dizzy and nauseous from the combination of physical exertion, malnutrition, and overheating. Your fellow workers are all in similar condition, a collection of broken-down human beings pushing their bodies beyond reasonable limits, because the alternative is death. Old Henrik, who must be nearly 50 and is therefore ancient by peasant standards, works beside you with hands so gnarled by arthritis that he can barely grip his tools. Young Maud, who gave birth just 3 weeks ago and should still be recovering, bends over her hoe while milk leaks through her dress and flies swarm around the stains. Little Thomas, who can't be more than 10 years old, struggles with a hoe that's taller than he is, his thin arms shaking with exhaustion after just an hour of work. The overseer Willem shows no mercy to anyone. When old Henrik slows down due to a coughing fit that brings up blood, Willem strikes him across the shoulders with his whip and screams at him to work faster. When young Maud stumbles and falls, dizzy from blood loss and exhaustion, Willem kicks her in the ribs and threatens to dock her family's food rations if she falls again. When little Thomas begins crying from exhaustion and pain, Willem grabs him by the ear and tells him that tears are for babies, not workers. The work breaks down your body in systematic ways. Your spine, forced into an unnatural position for hours at a time, develops a permanent curve that makes standing upright increasingly difficult. Your hands become so damaged from gripping rough tools that you lose feeling in your fingertips and develop a constant tremor. Your shoulders and arms, strained by the repetitive motions, develop chronic pain that makes sleeping difficult even when you're exhausted. Your legs, supporting your weight in awkward positions all day, become weak and unsteady. But the physical damage is only part of the torture. The mental strain of performing mind-numbing repetitive work while hungry, in pain, and under constant threat of punishment creates a psychological hell that's almost worse than the physical suffering. You must maintain complete focus despite your body's distress, because a moment of inattention could result in injury, punishment, or both. You must appear grateful for the opportunity to destroy your body in service to Lord Aldrich, because showing any sign of resentment or rebellion could result in your family being thrown off the land entirely. The work schedule is relentless. You begin before dawn and continue until well after sunset, with only brief breaks for meals that barely qualify as food. During harvest season, you might work 18 or 20 hours a day, collapsing in the fields from exhaustion and being expected to resume work the moment you regain consciousness. During winter, when fieldwork is impossible, you're assigned other tasks: hauling water, gathering firewood, spinning thread, or maintaining the Lord's equipment. There is never a day without work, never a moment when your body's allowed to rest and heal. The tools you use are designed not for efficiency or worker safety, but for cheapness and durability. They're heavy, awkward, and often dangerous. Accidents are common and usually serious. A slip with a sharp sickle can sever fingers or arteries. A fall while carrying heavy loads can break bones, and there's no medical treatment available for serious injuries. Workers who are permanently disabled by accidents are simply discarded, left to beg or starve because they're no longer useful to the Lord. As the day wears on and your body screams in protest from hours of back-breaking labour, nature itself joins the conspiracy against your survival. In your world, weather isn't just an inconvenience to complain about, it's an active enemy that can kill you in dozens of different ways, and you have absolutely no protection against its assault. The spring morning that began with tolerable coolness has transformed into a blazing furnace that turns your heavy wool dress into a portable torture device. The sun beats down mercilessly on the open fields where you work, with no trees, no shade, and no shelter of any kind. The thick fabric of your dress, already soaked with sweat from hours of labour, now clings to your skin like a wet blanket made of sandpaper. Every movement chafes your raw skin, and the accumulated moisture creates perfect breeding conditions for the fungi and bacteria that cause the painful skin infections you've learned to accept as normal. But the heat is only the beginning of your meteorological torment. As the temperature rises, the sun begins cooking the human and animal waste that covers every surface of your world. The fields are fertilized with human excrement from the village latrine, creating a miasma of stench that rises with the heat like visible waves of contamination. The smell is so thick you can taste it, so overwhelming that breathing becomes a conscious effort to avoid gagging. Your already queasy stomach, weakened by malnutrition and the morning's meagre meal, churns constantly as you're forced to work in this toxic atmosphere. The sun itself becomes a weapon against your exposed skin. Your arms, face, and neck, unprotected by any kind of covering, begin to burn within hours. There's no sunscreen in your world, no hat except for the occasional straw covering that only the wealthier peasants can afford, and certainly no understanding that sun exposure can be dangerous. Your skin turns red, then begins to blister, creating painful sores that crack and bleed when you move. These burns will peel and become infected, adding to the collection of wounds that cover your body and never seem to heal properly. As you work bent over your hoe, sweat pours from your body in quantities that would alarm modern doctors. But this isn't the clean, saltwater sweat of a modern gymnasium. This is the toxic outpouring of a body that's fighting malnutrition, disease, and contamination on multiple fronts. Your sweat carries the smell of infection, poor diet, and internal decay, and it stings when it runs into the open cuts and sores that cover your hands and arms. The constant moisture makes your already rough clothing even more abrasive, turning every movement into an exercise in pain tolerance. The heat brings other torments that compound your misery. Flies, attracted by the combination of human waste, rotting organic matter, and your sweating body, swarm around you in clouds so thick they sometimes make it difficult to see. These aren't just annoying houseflies, they're disease-carrying insects that bite, sting, and lay eggs in any open wound they can find. They crawl into your mouth when you're breathing hard from exertion, fly into your eyes, and cover any exposed food or water, contaminating everything they touch. But perhaps worse than the flies are the other insects that emerge in the heat. Wasps and hornets, made aggressive by the rising temperature, attack without warning when you accidentally disturb their nests hidden in the tall grass. Their stings are agonizing, and with no treatment available except perhaps a handful of mud pressed against the wound, the pain can last for days. Some people are deathly allergic to these stings, and you've watched neighbours die from what seemed like minor insect attacks, their throats swelling shut as their families watched helplessly. The heat also affects your work tools in ways that make an already difficult job nearly impossible. The wooden handle of your hoe becomes so hot it burns your hands when you grip it, but letting go isn't an option. The metal blade heats up enough to cause serious burns if you accidentally touch it, which happens frequently when you're exhausted and your coordination is impaired by heat stroke. The ground itself becomes so hot that working barefoot becomes a constant dance of pain, lifting first one foot then the other to prevent the soles from burning. Water becomes both desperately needed and dangerously scarce. You're losing fluids faster than you can replace them, but the only water available is from the contaminated village well. And even that must be rationed because carrying water to the fields is an additional burden that takes time away from your required work. When you do get a chance to drink, the warm, foul-tasting water does little to refresh you and often makes you feel sicker than before. As the day progresses and the heat becomes truly unbearable, you begin to experience the early stages of heat exhaustion. Your vision becomes blurry, your coordination deteriorates, and you feel dizzy and nauseous. But there's no medical understanding of heat-related illness in your world, and certainly no treatment for it. The overseer Willem sees your stumbling and assumes you're being lazy, threatening you with punishment if you don't maintain your pace. So you continue working even as your body begins to shut down from the heat. The sun's reflection off the light-coloured soil creates a glare so intense it gives you splitting headaches and makes your eyes water constantly. You have to squint to see what you're doing, which makes the precise work of hoeing even more difficult and increases your chances of injury. The constant squinting gives you deep lines around your eyes that make you look decades older than your actual age, and the headaches become so severe they make concentration nearly impossible. But even as you suffer through this hellish heat, You know that winter will bring equally deadly but opposite challenges. The same fields where you now swelter will become frozen wastelands, where frostbite can claim fingers and toes in minutes. The same wool dress that now suffocates you with heat will provide inadequate protection against temperatures that can freeze exposed skin in seconds. Your unheated hovel will become a freezing cave where ice forms on the inside walls, and your breath creates clouds that never dissipate. The weather in your world isn't just uncomfortable, it's a constant threat to life itself, and you have no protection against its extremes except whatever shelter your own body can provide. As you continue your grueling work under the blazing sun, a sharp pain suddenly shoots through your lower back. Not the usual ache from bending over, but something different, something that makes you gasp and nearly drop your hoe. You've just experienced what would be recognized today as a muscle strain, but in your world, this moment marks the beginning of a medical nightmare that could easily become a death sentence. There are no doctors in Grimhaven. The nearest thing to medical care is Brother Aldwyn at the monastery, 2 days' walk away, who treats illness by bleeding patients and prescribing prayers. But even if you could afford to lose 2 days of work and make the dangerous journey, his treatments are more likely to kill you than cure you. Instead, you must rely on the village's healer, old Gwendolyn, a half-blind woman whose medical knowledge consists of superstitions, folklore, and remedies that are often more dangerous than the conditions they're meant to treat. The pain in your back is excruciating, sending shooting agony down your left leg with every movement. In the modern world, this would be diagnosed as a herniated disc or severe muscle strain, treated with rest, anti-inflammatory medication, and physical therapy. In your world, pain is viewed as either a test from God or punishment for sin, and the only treatment is to endure it while continuing to work. You know that showing weakness or asking for help will result in punishment from Willem the Overseer, so you bite down on your lip until you taste blood and force yourself to continue hoeing. But as the hours pass, other symptoms begin to manifest. The cut on your hand from yesterday's work, which seemed minor at the time, has become swollen and hot to the touch. Red streaks are beginning to extend up your arm, what modern medicine would recognize as the early signs of blood poisoning, a potentially fatal condition that kills quickly without antibiotic treatment. But in your world, infection is so common that people barely notice it until it's too late. Your understanding of disease is based entirely on the theory of humours, the belief that illness is caused by an imbalance of the 4 bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. According to this system, your back pain is caused by too much black bile, while your infected hand indicates an excess of yellow bile heated by bad air. The prescribed treatment for both conditions is the same: bloodletting to restore balance to your humours. Old Gwendolyn arrives at the field when someone reports your condition to her. She's a frightening figure, bent with age, missing most of her teeth, and carrying a leather bag filled with instruments that look more like torture devices than medical tools. Her examination consists of looking at your eyes, smelling your breath, and feeling your forehead, with hands that haven't been washed in weeks. She pronounces that you have hot blood and corrupted humours that must be released immediately. The bloodletting begins with Gwendolyn using a rusty knife to make deep cuts in your forearm, directly over a vein. There's no attempt at sterilisation. The blade is wiped clean with a dirty rag that's been used on dozens of other patients. The cuts are deeper than necessary and immediately begin bleeding heavily. As your blood flows into a wooden bowl, Gwendolyn mutters incantations and prayers, convinced that she's performing a sacred medical ritual rather than potentially hastening your death through blood loss and infection. While you're being bled, Gwendolyn also applies her other favourite treatment, leeches. These slimy, blood-sucking worms are kept in a clay pot filled with stagnant water, and they're applied to various parts of your body without any understanding of anatomy or the actual cause of your symptoms. The leeches attach themselves to your skin and begin draining blood, while Gwendolyn explains that they're drawing out the corrupt humours that are causing your illness. The pain relief you desperately need doesn't exist in any form you could access. There's no aspirin, no morphine, no anaesthesia of any kind. The closest thing to pain medication in your world is alcohol, but even weak ale is too precious to waste on pain relief when it could be sold or traded for food. Instead, you're given a mixture of herbs that Gwendolyn has prepared. A foul-tasting concoction made from willow bark, which does contain a natural pain reliever, though in unpredictable doses, crushed beetles, which do nothing except make you nauseous, and various plants that may or may not be poisonous. The herbal remedy is prepared under conditions that would horrify modern medical professionals. Gwendolyn uses the same unwashed pot she uses for all her preparations, mixing ingredients with her bare hands while flies buzz around the mixture. The water used to make the brew comes from the same contaminated village well that everyone drinks from, and the herbs themselves have been stored in damp conditions that promote the growth of dangerous molds and fungi. As the bloodletting continues, you begin to feel weak and dizzy, not from the relief of having bad humours removed, but from losing blood your already weakened body desperately needs. Gwendolyn takes this as a good sign, evidence that the treatment is working, and continues bleeding you until you're on the verge of fainting. The blood loss, combined with your existing malnutrition and dehydration, creates a dangerous situation that could easily result in shock or death. The infected cut on your hand receives treatment that's guaranteed to make it worse. Gwendolyn packs the wound with a mixture of animal dung believed to have healing properties, crushed herbs and cobwebs thought to stop bleeding. This poultice is then wrapped with a dirty cloth that hasn't been washed in months. The combination virtually ensures that the infection will spread, introducing new bacteria into an already compromised wound. Your back pain is treated with a technique called cupping, where heated glass vessels are placed on your skin to create suction. The theory is that this will draw out the evil humours causing your pain, but the reality is that it creates painful blisters and does nothing to address the actual problem. The cups are applied without any consideration for cleanliness, and the resulting wounds often become infected themselves. Throughout this entire ordeal, you're conscious and in agony, but you must remain grateful and respectful to Gwendolyn. Questioning her methods or expressing doubt about her treatments could result in accusations of witchcraft or heresy. You must thank her for her efforts and pay her with food your family can't afford to spare, even though her treatments are making you sicker and weaker. The final element of your medical care is spiritual. Brother Matthias from the village church arrives to pray over you, explaining that your illness is likely punishment for some unconfessed sin. He demands that you confess all your wrongdoings while he performs last rites, just in case you die from your condition. The psychological impact of being told you're dying as punishment for your sins, while already weakened by blood loss and infection, creates additional stress that further compromises your body's ability to heal. As the treatments conclude and you're left alone to recover, you realise that you feel significantly worse than before the medical care began. Your infected hand is now throbbing with increased pain, your back feels no better, and you've lost blood you couldn't afford to lose. But in 3 days, you'll be expected back in the fields regardless of your condition, because in your world, the only alternative to working while sick is dying while unemployed. As you lie on your mouldy straw mattress, weakened by bloodletting and fighting infection, the true weight of your existence in medieval Grimhaven becomes clear. You are not a person with rights, freedoms, or choices. You're property, controlled by a system so rigid and oppressive that every aspect of your life, from your daily activities to your most intimate thoughts, belongs to someone else. Welcome to the suffocating reality of feudal social control, where stepping out of line doesn't just mean punishment, it means complete destruction. The church bell that woke you this morning isn't just a timekeeper, it's the sound of your spiritual prison. Every aspect of your life is dictated by the church calendar, church law, and the church's interpretation of God's will. Father Benedict, the village priest, is not a gentle shepherd of souls, but a political enforcer who watches your every move for signs of moral deviation. He knows when you attend Mass, how much you contribute to church collections, whether you confess your sins regularly, and even details about your private life that would shock modern people with their invasiveness. This Sunday, like every Sunday, you must attend morning Mass regardless of your physical condition. Missing church isn't just spiritually dangerous, it's legally punishable. Father Benedict keeps detailed records of attendance, and those who skip services find themselves facing fines they can't afford, extra labour obligations, or worse, as you struggle to sit upright in the cold, drafty church building, listening to a Latin sermon you can't understand. You're also being watched and judged by your neighbours, who know that reporting suspicious behaviour to the priest can earn them favour and perhaps better treatment for their own families. The sermon isn't about love and redemption, it's about obedience and fear. Father Benedict describes in vivid detail the torments awaiting those who question authority, whether earthly or divine. He explains that your suffering is part of God's plan, that your poverty is evidence of spiritual unworthiness, and that attempting to improve your situation might actually be sinful pride. The message is clear: accept your misery, work harder, give more to the church, and never, ever think that you deserve better than what you have. But the church's control extends far beyond Sunday sermons. Every major decision in your life requires ecclesiastical approval. When you married Gareth 7 years ago, the church controlled not just the ceremony, but the negotiations over your dowry, the timing of the wedding, and even guidelines for your sexual relationship. The priest explained that marital relations are only permissible for procreation, that pleasure is sinful, and that you must be available to your husband whenever he demands it, regardless of your health, feelings, or circumstances. Your pregnancies and childbirths are monitored by the church with an intensity that would make modern people recoil in horror. When you were carrying each of your children, Father Benedict questioned you regularly about your thoughts, dreams, and behaviours, looking for signs that you might be harbouring sinful desires that could corrupt the unborn child. When 3 of your babies died in infancy, he suggested that their deaths might be punishment for your inadequate faith or hidden sins. The guilt and shame imposed by these accusations have poisoned your grief and made the loss of your children even more unbearable. The church also controls your economic life through a system of tithes and obligations that keeps you perpetually on the edge of starvation. You must give 1/10 of everything you produce to the church: grain, eggs, cloth, even your labour time. This tithe is collected ruthlessly, with church officials counting every sheaf of grain and every loaf of bread to ensure you're not holding back. During years of poor harvest, when your family is already facing starvation, the church still demands its full share, explaining that God's needs come before your own survival. Beyond the regular tithe, there are constant additional demands: special collections for church repairs, payments for baptisms and funerals, fees for blessing your crops, charges for marriage ceremonies, and penalties for various infractions of church law. Each payment is justified as necessary for your spiritual welfare, but the cumulative effect is to ensure that you never accumulate enough resources to gain any independence or security. The church's surveillance system extends into the most private aspects of your life. Confession isn't just a spiritual practice. It's an intelligence-gathering operation where Father Benedict extracts information about your thoughts, your family's activities, your neighbours' behaviours, and any signs of dissent or rebellion. The seal of confession, that supposedly protects your secrets, is meaningless when the priest can use the information to control and manipulate you without explicitly revealing its source. Your children are indoctrinated from birth into this system of spiritual oppression. Little Mara and Jorin are taught that questioning authority is sinful, that accepting suffering without complaint is virtuous, and that their parents' poverty is evidence of moral failing. They learn to inform the priest about any unusual conversations they overhear at home, any expressions of doubt or frustration, any signs that their parents might be harbouring dangerous thoughts about improving their situation. The legal system that governs your life is inseparable from religious law. Lord Aldrich's authority is supposedly granted by God, making rebellion against him not just treason but heresy. The village reeve, who enforces the Lord's will, works closely with Father Benedict to identify and punish anyone who shows signs of discontent. Justice isn't about fairness or evidence. It's about maintaining order through fear and ensuring that everyone stays in their assigned place in God's supposed hierarchy. Women face additional layers of control that make your situation even more desperate. You cannot own property, enter into contracts, or make legal decisions without male approval. Your testimony in legal proceedings is worth less than a man's, and in many cases you cannot testify at all. If Gareth dies, you become completely dependent on your son Jorin, and if he dies too, you face destitution or forced remarriage to someone chosen by Lord Aldrich or the church. The control extends to your body and your reproductive choices. You have no right to refuse your husband's sexual demands, no access to birth control, and no say in how many children you bear regardless of your health or your family's ability to feed them. The church teaches that women's bodies exist primarily for men's pleasure and for producing children, and that any attempt to control your own fertility is sinful rebellion against God's will. Even your thoughts aren't truly your own. The Church teaches that evil thoughts are as sinful as evil actions, making you responsible for controlling not just your behavior, but your very mind. Doubting God's justice when your children die, resenting your Lord's luxury while you starve, or wondering if there might be a better way to organize society. All of these natural human responses are classified as dangerous sins that must be confessed and punished. The psychological impact of this total control is devastating. You learn to police your own thoughts, to feel guilty for natural human emotions, and to accept that you have no right to happiness, comfort, or self-determination. The system doesn't just control your actions, it colonizes your mind, making you complicit in your own oppression by convincing you that resistance is not just futile but morally wrong. As you struggle through another day of pain, oppression, and grinding poverty, the most terrifying reality of your existence begins to crystallize. Death is not a distant possibility, but an immediate, ever-present companion that stalks through Grimhaven like a hungry wolf. Violence and mortality are so woven into the fabric of your daily life that what would shock and traumatize people in the modern world barely registers as unusual in your medieval nightmare. This morning, as you drag yourself to the village well despite your infected hand and aching back, you step around the body of old Margot, who died sometime during the night and hasn't been moved yet. Her corpse lies in the muddy street where she collapsed, and villagers simply walk around it as they go about their business. Death is so common in Grimhaven that it takes time to organize proper burial, and bodies often remain where they fall for days. Children play nearby, completely unbothered by the presence of death, because they've never known a world where people don't die regularly and visibly. Old Margot's death wasn't dramatic or noteworthy, she simply reached the end of her endurance. At 43, she was ancient by peasant standards, worn down by decades of malnutrition, disease, and backbreaking labour. She died alone, in pain, with no medical care and no comfort except the knowledge that her suffering was finally over. Her death will be recorded in the church registry as natural causes, though in reality she died from the accumulated damage of living in conditions that would be considered torture in any civilized society. Violence is equally commonplace and equally accepted as part of normal life. Just yesterday, you witnessed young Willem, not the overseer but a peasant boy of 16, receive a public beating for the crime of stealing a handful of grain from Lord Aldrich's storehouse. The punishment was administered by the village reeve with a leather whip that laid open the boy's back in bloody stripes. The entire village was required to watch, including children, as part of the educational value of public punishment. The beating wasn't just corporal punishment, it was a carefully orchestrated display of power designed to remind everyone of their place in the social hierarchy. Willem's screams echoed through the village as the whip fell again and again, and you were forced to watch as his blood spattered the ground and his body convulsed with each strike. The crowd watched in silence, knowing that showing sympathy for the victim could result in similar punishment for themselves. After 20 lashes, Willem collapsed unconscious, but the punishment wasn't over. He was left tied to the whipping post for the rest of the day, as a visual reminder of what happens to those who steal from their betters. By evening, when he was finally cut down, infection had already set into his wounds, and everyone knew he would likely die within the week. The grain he stole, barely enough for a single meal, wasn't worth the cost of his life, but that wasn't the point. The point was to maintain order through terror. Legal proceedings in Grimhaven are exercises in predetermined outcomes rather than genuine attempts at justice. When Goodman Robert was accused of poaching a rabbit from Lord Aldrich's forest, his trial consisted of Father Benedict asking him 3 times if he was guilty. Robert, knowing that denial would only result in harsher punishment, confessed immediately. His sentence was to have his right hand cut off, the standard punishment for theft. The amputation was performed in the village square using a rusty axe and a wooden chopping block stained dark with the blood of previous victims. There was no anaesthesia, no medical procedure, just Robert being held down by 4 men while the village blacksmith brought the axe down on his wrist. His screams could be heard throughout Grimhaven, and the spray of blood reached spectators standing several feet away. The wound was cauterized with a red-hot iron to stop the bleeding, causing Robert to pass out from the pain. Robert survived the amputation but died 3 days later from infection and blood loss. His wife and children, left without their primary breadwinner, faced starvation unless they could find someone willing to take them in. The rabbit he allegedly poached was never found, and many villagers suspected he was innocent. But speaking up about injustice was too dangerous to consider. Public executions are regular entertainment in your world, drawing crowds of spectators who bring their children to witness the spectacle. Last month, a travelling merchant was hanged for allegedly cheating customers with false weights. The execution took place on market day, ensuring maximum attendance. The merchant was forced to stand on a wooden crate with a rope around his neck while Father Benedict read his crimes and offered him a final chance to confess additional sins. When the crate was kicked away, the merchant didn't die quickly. The rope wasn't positioned correctly to break his neck, so he strangled slowly, his body convulsing and his face turning purple while the crowd watched. Children were lifted onto their parents' shoulders to get a better view of the death throes. The entire process took nearly 10 minutes, and when it was finally over, the body was left hanging for 3 days as a warning to other potential criminals. War is another constant source of violent death that haunts your existence. Although major battles don't reach Grimhaven directly, the village regularly faces raids from neighbouring lords' armies, bandits, and desperate groups of displaced peasants. Just last spring, a band of mercenaries swept through the area, burning crops, stealing livestock, and killing anyone who resisted. 7 villagers died in that raid, including 2 children who were caught hiding in a grain storage building that was set on fire. The aftermath of violence is as traumatic as the violence itself. Bodies must be disposed of quickly to prevent disease, but proper burial requires resources that most families don't have. Mass graves are common, with multiple corpses thrown into single holes and covered with lime when it's available. The smell of decomposition is a regular part of village life, especially during summer months when bodies decay rapidly. Domestic violence is not only tolerated but legally sanctioned. Husbands have the right to discipline their wives physically, and the only restriction is that they shouldn't cause permanent damage or death. You've witnessed neighbours beaten unconscious by their husbands for infractions as minor as burning bread or speaking disrespectfully. The Church supports this violence, teaching that women's submission to male authority is divinely ordained and that resistance to reasonable physical correction is sinful. Children face their own forms of sanctioned violence. Parents are expected to beat their children regularly as part of proper upbringing, and employers have similar rights over young workers. You've seen children as young as 8 receive brutal beatings for minor mistakes, and permanent injury or death from these disciplinary measures is considered unfortunate but acceptable. Perhaps most horrifying is how normalized all this violence becomes. You no longer flinch when you hear screams from neighbouring houses. You don't feel shock when you discover another body in the street. You've learned to keep your eyes down during public punishments, and to show appropriate respect for authority even when it's demonstrably unjust and cruel. The constant exposure to violence has numbed your emotional responses and made brutality seem like a natural part of human existence. This normalization of death and violence serves a crucial function in maintaining social control. When life is cheap and death is commonplace, people become less likely to risk rebellion or resistance. The message is clear. This is what happens to those who step out of line, and it could happen to you just as easily. As the church bells of Grimhaven toll the end of another day that has tested the very limits of human endurance, you collapse onto your bed of mouldy straw with the crushing knowledge that tomorrow will bring nothing but more of the same. If you're fortunate enough to see tomorrow at all, you have just experienced a single day in the life of a medieval peasant woman, and if you're honest with yourself, you know with absolute certainty that you would never survive a week in Meredith's world. Let's be brutally honest about what we've just witnessed together. In the past hour, we've walked through a reality so harsh, so utterly devoid of basic human dignity, that it challenges everything we think we know about survival, hardship, and the human capacity for endurance. Meredith's daily existence, waking up in filth, eating contaminated food, working until her body breaks down, living without privacy, medical care, or basic rights, represents the normal experience for roughly 90% of all humans who lived during the medieval period. You started this day thinking you might understand what hard times meant. Maybe you've faced financial struggles, worked demanding jobs, or dealt with difficult living situations, but nothing in your modern experience comes close to the relentless, systematic brutality that Meredith faces every single moment of her existence. The worst day of your life, your most challenging period, your deepest struggles, would represent luxury and ease compared to Meredith's best day. Consider what you've taken for granted just while watching this video. You've been breathing clean air that won't give you lung disease. You've been sitting in a controlled climate that won't kill you with heat or cold. You've had access to clean water that won't poison you with every sip. Your skin isn't crawling with parasites. Your clothes aren't making you sick. You're not slowly starving to death. You're not in constant physical pain. You haven't been threatened with violence for expressing an opinion. You're not watching your children die from preventable diseases. The gap between Meredith's reality and yours is so vast that it's almost impossible to comprehend. You live in a world where your biggest daily decision might be what to eat for lunch, and you have dozens of safe, nutritious options available at the touch of a button. Meredith's biggest daily decision is whether to risk drinking contaminated water or face dehydration. You worry about Wi-Fi speed and traffic delays. Meredith worries about whether her infected wound will kill her before winter arrives. But here's what makes Meredith's story even more heartbreaking. She doesn't know how abnormal her suffering is. She's never experienced clean water, adequate food, medical care, education, or personal freedom. She doesn't know that humans are capable of creating societies where children don't die routinely, where women have rights, where people can live into old age without constant pain. She accepts her misery as the natural order of things because it's all she's ever known. This isn't ancient history we're talking about. This is the lived reality of our direct ancestors, people whose genetic material flows through our veins. People who endured unimaginable hardship so that subsequent generations could survive and eventually thrive. Every person watching this video is here because dozens of their ancestors somehow survived conditions that would break most of us within days. The medieval period wasn't a romantic age of chivalry and noble quests. It wasn't a simpler, more authentic time when people lived in harmony with nature. It was a historical nightmare characterized by systemic oppression, routine violence, preventable disease, and levels of suffering that we can barely comprehend. The good old days were never good for anyone except a tiny elite who built their comfort on the backs of people like Meredith. Modern life, for all its problems and challenges, represents the most extraordinary period of human prosperity, health, and freedom in the entire history of our species. You're living better than medieval kings ever dreamed possible. You have access to medical care that would seem like divine intervention to people in Meredith's world. You have educational opportunities that were literally unimaginable to 99% of medieval humans. You have personal freedoms that people died fighting for across centuries of gradual progress. This doesn't mean your problems aren't real, or that you shouldn't work to improve your situation. It doesn't mean we should ignore poverty, injustice, or suffering in the modern world. But it does mean that we should maintain perspective about the incredible privilege of living in an era where clean water flows from taps, where diseases can be cured with pills, where information is freely available, where social mobility is possible, and where individual rights are protected by law. Every convenience you enjoy, from the simple ability to flip a switch and have light appear, to the complex systems that deliver fresh food to your local store, represents the accumulated knowledge and labour of countless generations who built our civilization brick by brick, often dying in the process. Your comfortable life exists because millions of people like Meredith endured a misery we can barely imagine, slowly creating the foundations for the world we now inhabit. Tonight, when you go to sleep in your clean bed, in your climate-controlled room, with your security systems and medical care and abundant food supply, take a moment to appreciate the extraordinary miracle of your existence. You have won the lottery of human history simply by being born in the modern era. You're living in what medieval people would have considered paradise, and you're doing it so casually that you probably don't even notice most of the miracles that surround you. Meredith's story isn't meant to make you feel guilty about your advantages, it's meant to make you grateful for them. It's meant to remind you that progress is possible, that human civilization can improve, and that we have a responsibility to protect and build upon the advances that lifted us out of the medieval nightmare. The next time you turn on a tap and clean water flows out, remember Meredith drinking from contaminated wells. The next time you visit a doctor and receive effective treatment, remember her being bled with dirty knives. The next time you make a choice about your career, your relationships, or your future, remember that Meredith had no choices at all. You wouldn't last a day as a medieval peasant because you've been shaped by a world of possibilities that Meredith could never imagine. And that's not a weakness. It's a testament to how far we've come and how much we have to protect. Her suffering wasn't meaningless if we learn from it. Her endurance wasn't pointless if it helps us appreciate what we have. And her story isn't over as long as we remember that the comfortable world we inhabit was built by countless people who lived, struggled, and died in conditions we can barely comprehend. Sleep well tonight. You've earned it simply by being human in the 21st century. As you close your eyes tonight in whatever comfortable space you call home, there's one final truth about Meredith's world that we haven't yet confronted. Perhaps the most devastating reality of all. In 1347, as she struggles through another day of unimaginable hardship in Grimhaven, something is already spreading across Europe that will make everything we've discussed seem like a minor inconvenience. The Black Death is coming, and it will transform Meredith's world of constant suffering into an apocalyptic nightmare that defies human comprehension. Meredith doesn't know it yet, but in the trading cities to the south, people are already dying in numbers that seem impossible. Entire families are being found dead in their homes. Ships are arriving in ports with their entire crews deceased, drifting ghost vessels that bring death as cargo. The plague is moving north through trade routes and travel paths, carried by fleas on rats, by human contact, and by the very social connections that hold medieval society together. Within 6 months, this plague will reach Grimhaven, and when it does, Meredith's village will become a charnel house. The disease doesn't discriminate. It kills the lord in his castle and the peasant in her hovel with equal efficiency. But for people like Meredith, already weakened by malnutrition, poor hygiene, and constant stress, the plague will be especially merciless. Her infected hand, her malnourished children, her exhausted husband, all of these existing vulnerabilities will make her family prime targets for a disease that kills between 30% and 60% of everyone it touches. Imagine Meredith's world, already a landscape of suffering, transformed into something even more horrific. Picture Grimhaven when half the population is dead or dying. The fields that Meredith works so hard to maintain will lie abandoned because there aren't enough living people to tend them. The social structures that oppress her, the church hierarchy, the feudal obligations, the village authority, will collapse not through revolution but through sheer mortality. Bodies will pile up faster than they can be buried. Mass graves will be dug, then abandoned when the gravediggers themselves succumb to disease. Entire families will die in their hovels, their bodies discovered weeks later when the smell becomes overwhelming. Children will be found alive but alone, their parents dead around them, crying over corpses they don't understand will never wake up again. The plague will destroy the very foundations of medieval society in ways that peasant rebellions never could. Lords will die alongside their serfs. Priests who preach about divine justice will succumb to the same disease as the sinners they condemn. The carefully maintained hierarchies that keep people like Meredith in perpetual servitude will crumble when there simply aren't enough survivors to maintain them. If Meredith somehow survives, and the odds are heavily against her, she will emerge into a transformed world. The survivors will find themselves in a landscape emptied of people, where abandoned villages dot the countryside like tombstones. Labour will become so scarce that surviving peasants can demand better treatment, higher wages, and improved living conditions. The rigid social structures that seemed eternal and unchangeable will prove to be as fragile as human life itself. But survival will come at an unimaginable psychological cost. Meredith will watch her children die one by one, probably including little Aldwyn, whose malnourished body can't fight off the disease. She'll see her husband Gareth, already weakened by fever and poor health, succumb within days of showing symptoms. She'll witness her neighbours, her friends, everyone she's ever known, dying in agony while she remains helpless to help them or even comfort them, because approaching the sick means almost certain death. The plague will strip away the last pretenses of medieval civilization. Religious faith will be shattered as prayers prove useless against disease. Social bonds will dissolve as people abandon their families to save themselves. The thin veneer of humanity that makes Meredith's harsh world bearable will disappear entirely, leaving only the most primal struggle for individual survival. Yet even in this ultimate nightmare, there's a strange hope. The Black Death, for all its horror, will mark the beginning of the end of the medieval world that tortures people like Meredith. The massive population loss will force social changes that centuries of gradual reform never achieved. The survivors will inherit a world where labour is valued, where social mobility becomes possible, where the rigid hierarchies of feudalism begin to crack and crumble. Meredith's suffering, if she survives it, will not have been meaningless. She will be part of the generation that witnesses the death of the old world and the painful birth of something new. The plague that destroys her life will also destroy the system that made her life so miserable. The catastrophe that takes everything from her will also free her from the bonds that held her in perpetual servitude. This is the final lesson of Meredith's story, that even the worst catastrophes can become catalysts for change. The medieval world that seemed so permanent, so unchangeable, so inevitably harsh, proved to be surprisingly fragile when confronted with a crisis it couldn't absorb or overcome. The social structures that oppressed millions of people like Meredith for centuries collapsed in just a few years of pandemic. So as you drift off to sleep tonight, safe in your modern world with your modern medicine and your modern freedoms, remember that you are not just living better than medieval peasants. You're living in a world that was built on the ruins of systems that once seemed eternal and unchangeable. The comfortable life you enjoy exists because people endured unimaginable suffering, because catastrophes forced social evolution, and because humanity has always found ways to build something better from the ashes of what came before. Meredith's world was not the natural state of human existence. It was a historical aberration, a period when circumstances conspired to create maximum suffering for maximum numbers of people. And it ended, not gradually, not through enlightenment, but catastrophically, violently, and completely. Your world is proof that no matter how dark things become, change is always possible. Even in the depths of medieval despair, the seeds of modern civilization were taking root. Even in Meredith's darkest moments, the future was being born. Sleep well, wake up grateful, and remember that the world you inherit came at a price we can barely comprehend. As we reach the end of Meredith's story, there's one final truth we must confront, a truth so profound and unsettling that it forces us to question everything we think we know about human progress, civilization, and our own place in history. What if I told you that Meredith's nightmare world isn't just a relic of the distant past, but a stark reminder of how quickly everything we take for granted can disappear? Right now, as you sit in your comfortable modern life, there are people living in conditions that would make Meredith's existence seem luxurious by comparison. In refugee camps, in war zones, in areas devastated by climate change or economic collapse, millions of human beings are experiencing variations of the medieval nightmare we've just explored. They're drinking contaminated water, eating inadequate food, living without medical care, and facing violence as a daily reality. The medieval world didn't disappear. It just moved to places where comfortable people don't have to see it. But here's the more disturbing truth. The systems that protect you from Meredith's fate are far more fragile than you imagine. Your clean water depends on infrastructure that requires constant maintenance and can fail catastrophically. Your food supply relies on global networks that can be disrupted by conflicts, climate events, or economic shocks. Your medical care depends on complex supply chains for medicines and equipment that span the globe. Your personal safety depends on social and political stability that history shows us is never permanent. Consider how quickly modern societies can collapse into medieval conditions. Look at Syria, where cities with hospitals, universities, and thriving economies were reduced to rubble and medieval-level suffering within just a few years. Look at Venezuela, where a middle-class society with modern infrastructure descended into food scarcity and medical shortages almost overnight. Look at any natural disaster. Hurricane Katrina, the 2011 tsunami in Japan, the recent earthquakes in Turkey, and see how quickly the veneer of civilization can be stripped away, leaving people to face conditions that Meredith would recognize. The comfortable assumption that we've permanently escaped the medieval world is perhaps the most dangerous illusion of modern life. We haven't transcended the conditions that created Meredith's suffering. We've simply built elaborate systems to keep those conditions at bay. And those systems require constant vigilance, constant maintenance, and constant protection from the forces that would drag us back into the darkness. Think about how dependent you are on systems you don't understand and can't control. Your electricity comes from power grids you've never seen. Your food comes from farms thousands of miles away. Your medicine comes from factories in distant countries. Your safety depends on police, military, and intelligence services you never interact with. You live in a web of interdependence so complex that you couldn't survive without it, yet so complex that you can't possibly understand all its vulnerabilities. Meredith lived in a world where local disasters stayed local, where communities were self-sufficient by necessity, where people understood exactly where their food and water came from because they produced it themselves. In some ways, her world was more resilient than ours, even as it was more brutal. She knew how to grow food, preserve meat, treat wounds with herbs, and survive without external support. Most modern people would die within weeks if the systems they depend on suddenly disappeared. This isn't meant to make you paranoid or pessimistic about the future. It's meant to make you appreciate how extraordinary and fragile our current moment in history really is. You're living in a brief golden age of human civilization, a temporary island of prosperity and safety in an ocean of historical suffering. This golden age exists because previous generations fought, died, and sacrificed to build the institutions, technologies, and social structures that protect you from Meredith's fate. But golden ages don't last forever. They require active protection, constant renewal, and the wisdom to recognize threats before they become fatal. The Roman Empire seemed permanent to its citizens right up until it collapsed. The medieval social order seemed divinely ordained and unchangeable right up until the Black Death shattered it. Every civilization in history has believed it was the pinnacle of human achievement, right up until it wasn't. Your responsibility, having been born into this extraordinary moment, is not just to enjoy its benefits, but to help preserve and extend them. The clean water, abundant food, medical care, education, and personal freedoms you enjoy aren't natural rights. They're hard-won achievements that require vigilant protection. The institutions that keep you safe from Meredith's world, democratic governments, scientific medicine, international trade, environmental protection, human rights organizations, all exist because people chose to build and maintain them despite enormous obstacles. The medieval world teaches us that progress is not inevitable, that civilization is not permanent, and that the gap between comfort and catastrophe can be crossed in a single generation. But it also teaches us that humans are capable of enduring unimaginable hardship and emerging stronger. Meredith's world eventually gave birth to yours, not through gradual evolution, but through the accumulated efforts of millions of people who refused to accept that suffering was inevitable. So what will you do with this knowledge? How will you use the extraordinary privileges of your modern life? Will you take them for granted, assuming they'll always be there? Or will you recognize them as the miraculous, fragile gifts they truly are? The story of Meredith of Grimhaven isn't just history. It's a warning, a reminder, and a call to action. It's a reminder that the world you inherited came at an incredible cost, that it exists only because people fought to create it, and that it will survive only if people continue to fight to preserve it. Tomorrow morning, when you wake up in your clean bed, turn on your tap for safe water and step into a world of unlimited possibilities. Remember Meredith. Remember that your comfort exists because someone, somewhere, is working to maintain the systems that keep medieval conditions at bay. Remember that your freedoms exist because people died defending them. Remember that your opportunities exist because previous generations sacrificed to create them. And then ask yourself, what will you sacrifice to ensure that future generations don't have to live like Meredith? What will you contribute to the great human project of building a world where no one has to endure what she endured? The medieval world is still out there, waiting to reclaim us if we're not careful. But so is the possibility of something even better than what we have now. A world where the suffering we've explored tonight becomes not just rare, but impossible. The choice is ours, the responsibility is ours, and the time to act is now. Meredith's story ends here, but yours continues. Make it count. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.